Hi everyone, I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I think I've officially hit my breaking point when it comes to my family. For as long as I can remember, I've been compared to my cousin Emily. She's 29, and if you met her, you'd probably think she's perfect too. Emily is the kind of person who seems to have everything figured out. She's brilliant, charming, and ridiculously successful. And while I've been struggling to carve out my own place in life, she's been the family's golden child. This story isn't really about hating Emily. Honestly, she's fine. The problem is how my family has spent my entire life putting her on a pedestal and using her as a measuring stick for me. I'm finally at a point where I've realized I can't keep living like this. Here's what happened. Growing up, I didn't think much about the comparisons at first. Emily and I were close as kids. She was always the older cousin I looked up to. She got straight A's, played the violin, and seemed to be good at literally everything. Meanwhile, I was just me. I liked drawing and playing video games. I wasn't a bad student, but I wasn't winning any academic awards either. Things started getting weird around middle school. I remember one time I entered a local art contest and won first place. I was so proud, and when I showed my parents, they were happy until someone brought up that Emily had won a regional science fair the year before. Suddenly, my big moment didn't feel so big anymore. My parents weren't trying to be mean, but it was like everything I did had to be put into the context of what Emily had already done, and done better. This dynamic played out over and over. At family gatherings, the adults couldn't stop talking about Emily. She got into an Ivy League school, amazing. Landed a six-figure job right after graduation, unbelievable. Meanwhile, I was just trying to survive community college after switching majors 3 times. Even my siblings joined in, joking that I should take notes from her. They didn't mean any harm, but it stung. I started avoiding things I wasn't already good at because I didn't want to fail and give people more reasons to compare me to her. If I couldn't be the best, what was the point? That mindset followed me into adulthood, and let's just say it didn't do me any favors. I ended up with a pretty average academic record and an okay job, not bad, but nothing that would ever get the same kind of attention Emily's achievements did. The most recent blow came a few weeks ago. Emily got some big award at work, and my family threw her a huge dinner to celebrate. I went because, well, you kind of have to show up to these things. I was already feeling awkward because I just started a new job, and it wasn't anything glamorous. During the dinner, one of my uncles made a joke about how Emily could give me some career advice. Everyone laughed, and I tried to laugh too, but inside I was fuming. It wasn't even what he said, it was how natural it felt for everyone to assume she was the standard I should aspire to. The breaking point came later that night. After dinner, we had a family game night, and it was fine at first. Then someone asked a trivia question that I knew the answer to, but Emily got to it first. Cue the chorus of wow. She's so smart. And of course Emily would know that. I sat there silently, pretending it didn't bother me, but something in me snapped. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. The constant comparisons, the subtle jabs, the way my own family made me feel small, it wasn't just hurting me, it was holding me back. I needed to take control of my life and stop letting their opinions define me. That night I went home and started making a plan. The first step was therapy. A friend had been encouraging me to try it for a while, and I finally caved. In my first session, I unloaded everything about my family, Emily, and how all of it had shaped the way I saw myself. My therapist suggested I set some boundaries, especially with my parents. That idea terrified me, but I knew it had to be done. I sat them down a few days later and explained how all the comparisons had affected me. I told them I didn't blame Emily and that this wasn't about her, it was about how they treated me. They didn't take it well. My mom said I was being too sensitive, and my dad called it harmless joking. I tried to stand my ground, but it felt like talking to a brick wall. Still, I wasn't going to let that stop me. If they couldn't respect my boundaries, I'd just have to enforce them myself. I started focusing on things I actually enjoyed, like photography. It wasn't about being the best, it was about finding something that made me happy. Around the same time, I had a big win at work. I spearheaded a project that went way better than expected, and for the first time in years, I felt proud of myself, not because anyone else said I should be, but because I genuinely was. That brings me to now. After years of feeling overshadowed and overlooked, I've decided to stop chasing my family's approval. I want to be proud of who I am, not who they think I should be. Writing this post feels like the first step in that process. I'm not sure where this journey will take me, but I'm finally ready to find out. Update 1. After my last post, I decided to make some big changes in how I deal with my family. Therapy was helping me understand that the constant comparisons weren't just annoying, they were toxic. My therapist encouraged me to focus on setting boundaries, which I did. But what happened next completely blindsided me. It started with a family dinner. My parents must have been feeling some type of way about the conversation we'd had because they decided to bring it up right in front of everyone. I wasn't there, I deliberately skipped this gathering, but I heard all about it afterward. According to my sister, my mom casually mentioned that I'd been feeling a little sensitive lately about how much they talk about Emily. My dad chimed in, saying it was all just harmless fun and that I needed to lighten up. Of course, this opened the floodgates. Some of my relatives thought it was hilarious, cracking jokes about how I must be jealous of Emily. Others took it more seriously, acting shocked that I'd been harboring these feelings for so long. One of my aunts even said something along the lines of, well, we didn't realize he was so insecure. When my sister told me all this later, I couldn't believe it. I'd had a private conversation with my parents about something deeply personal, and they turned it into dinner table gossip. I was furious but decided not to confront them right away. Instead, I stayed quiet and let them come to me, which didn't take long. The next day, Emily reached out. She called me out of the blue, saying she'd heard about what happened. She sounded genuinely apologetic, saying she never wanted to overshadow me and didn't realize how much the comparisons bothered me. She even admitted that it wasn't always easy for her either, that being the golden child came with its own pressures. Her words caught me off guard. I'd spent so much time resenting her that I never considered she might have her own struggles. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if she really understood what it felt like to always be in her shadow. I thanked her for reaching out but didn't say much else. I needed time to process what she'd said. Back in therapy, my therapist encouraged me to focus on my own growth rather than getting stuck in how others perceive me. I liked that idea, but it was easier said than done, especially when my family wasn't making things any easier. I made a bold decision to skip the next big family gathering, a birthday party for one of my cousins. I didn't make a big announcement about it, I just let my parents know I wouldn't be attending. As expected, they didn't take it well. My mom accused me of being dramatic, and my dad said I was hurting hurting the family by refusing to participate. I calmly told them I wasn't avoiding anyone, but I needed some space to focus on myself. That didn't go over well, but I stuck to my guns. During this time, I kept posting on Reddit. To my surprise, my initial post started gaining traction. Hundreds of people chimed in with supportive comments and advice, validating what I was going through. Some even shared their own stories about being compared to siblings or cousins, which made me feel less alone. One comment, in particular, stood out. The person speculated that Emily might have been under just as much pressure as I was, but in a different way. That really made me think. Maybe this wasn't just about me versus Emily. Maybe it was about the unhealthy dynamics in our entire family. Meanwhile, things at work were looking up. I'd been working hard on a project for weeks, and it finally paid off when I got an unexpected promotion. For once, I felt like I'd achieved something entirely on my own. I shared the news with a few close friends and posted about it on my personal social media, but I didn't tell my family. I wasn't trying to hide it, I just didn't want to deal with their reactions. Of course, that didn't last long. My mom found out about the promotion through a distant relative who'd seen my post. She called me immediately, acting hurt that I hadn't told her. I calmly explained that I wanted to celebrate my success without the constant comparisons. She didn't take it well, accusing me of keeping secrets and punishing the family for things that weren't intentional. At this point, I was done trying to explain myself. I told her that I wasn't withholding anything, I was just prioritizing my own happiness for once. That seemed to shut her down, at least temporarily. The most surprising development came from my younger sister. She started reaching out more, asking how I was doing and even admitting that she'd never realized how much the comparisons bothered me. She apologized for the time she'd teased me about Emily and said she wanted to be more supportive. It felt like a small victory in the middle of all the chaos. But not everyone was as understanding. One of my cousins posted a thinly veiled jab in the family group chat, saying something about people who can't handle a little family banter. I didn't respond. Instead, I muted the chat and moved on. I'm learning that not every battle is worth fighting. For now, I'm focusing on work, therapy, and my hobbies. The situation with my family is still messy, but I'm starting to see glimpses of progress. If nothing else, I'm learning to stand up for myself, and that feels like a win. Update 2. A few days after my last update, something unexpected happened. Emily reached out again. This time, it wasn't just a quick apology or a vague acknowledgement of the family dynamics. It was a real conversation. She wanted to meet up, so we grabbed coffee at a quiet cafe. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I definitely didn't expect what she told me. Emily opened up about how much pressure she's been under all these years. She said the pedestal our family put her on wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. Every achievement felt like another thing she had to top, and the constant praise didn't always feel good. She even admitted that there were times she wished she could just be normal, without the family constantly expecting her to be perfect. Hearing this was surprising, to say the least. I never really thought about what it might feel like for her. For the first time, we talked openly about the comparisons and how they affected both of us. She apologized again for any role she might have played, and this time, it felt more genuine. We agreed that our family's obsession with putting people into categories golden child, black sheep, etc. was toxic. Emily even admitted that she envied how I got to pursue my own path without everyone scrutinizing my every move. It was eye-opening to realize that, in her own way, Emily felt just as trapped by the family dynamics as I did. We decided to approach the next family gathering as a team. Emily suggested bringing up the issue with everyone, not in an aggressive way, but just to make them aware of how their words and actions had impacted us. I wasn't sure how that would go, but I appreciated her willingness to try. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A few days later, there was another family dinner. I wasn't planning to go, but after my conversation with Emily, I decided to give it a shot. If she was willing to stand up to the family, the least I could do was back her up. Dinner started off the way it always does, small talk, a few harmless jokes, and then like clockwork, someone brought up one of Emily's recent achievements. This time, instead of letting it slide, Emily gently interrupted. She said she appreciated the support, but felt it was important to address something that had been bothering her for a while. You could have heard a pin drop. Emily explained how the constant comparisons weren't just unfair to me, but also to her. She pointed out that it put unnecessary pressure on everyone involved and made family gatherings feel more like competitions than celebrations. Some of the older relatives looked uncomfortable, while others outright dismissed what she was saying. One aunt laughed it off, saying, "Oh, come on, it's just harmless fun. You two are overthinking this." My parents, predictably, got defensive. My mom insisted that they've always been fair and supportive, while my dad claimed I was imagining things and blowing everything out of proportion. Emily didn't back down, though. She calmly explained that whether or not they intended to hurt anyone, their words and actions had consequences. For the first time, I saw my cousin, the golden child, use her position to defend me. It felt surreal. To my surprise, my younger sister chimed in. She backed me up, saying that the comparisons were real and that she'd seen how they affected me over the years. Her support added weight to Emily's argument, and some of the other relatives started nodding along. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a start. For once, the spotlight wasn't entirely on Emily, it was on the issue at hand. After the dinner, I started making more deliberate choices about how I spent my time. Work was going well, but I didn't want it to consume me. I picked up photography again, this time with the goal of building a portfolio. I also started sharing more of my personal milestones online, like a photo I took that got featured in a local magazine. The response was overwhelming, with people from my online community cheering me on. It felt good to be recognized for something I cared about. Back on Reddit, I received a private message from someone who had read my posts. They shared their own experience with family comparisons and how they'd spent years seeking validation from people who would never give it. Their story hit close to home and made me think about my own patterns. Was I still looking for approval from my family even after everything? In therapy, I brought this up. My therapist pointed out how much progress I'd made in building my confidence and self-expression. They encouraged me to keep focusing on my own growth instead of trying to change my family. It felt like a breakthrough moment. Things with my parents, however, were still rocky. A few days after the dinner, they sat me down and told me I needed to stop making waves or risk alienating the family. It wasn't exactly an ultimatum, but it felt like one. I told them I wasn't trying to cause drama, I just wanted to create a healthier dynamic for everyone. They didn't seem convinced. Emily, true to her word, tried to mediate. She had a private conversation with my parents, explaining that she agreed with me and thought the family needed to change. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. My parents dismissed her concerns, claiming she was being influenced by me. It was frustrating, but Emily reassured me that she wasn't giving up. Meanwhile, the extended family was starting to notice the tension. A few relatives reached out, asking what was going on. I kept my responses neutral, calmly explaining my side of the story without bad-mouthing anyone. It wasn't easy, but I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. For now, I'm taking things one step at a time. The family dynamic is far from perfect, but I'm starting to see small cracks in the old patterns. Whether or not they're ready to change, I know I'm moving in the right direction. Update 3. The family drama didn't stay quiet for long. After Emily and I joined forces at the last family dinner, the tension seemed to simmer down, but only on the surface. Behind the scenes, things were bubbling over, and it didn't take long for the next big twist to shake things up. It started during a casual phone call with my aunt, the one who tends to know all the family gossip. She called to check in after hearing about some of the recent family drama, and during our chat, she let something slip. Apparently, my parents had gone through similar comparisons when they were younger. My dad's brother was the golden child back then, and my grandparents constantly pitted them against each other. My mom, on the other hand, grew up hearing about how her sister was the prettier and smarter one. Hearing this made everything click. It wasn't just about Emily and me, this was a cycle. My parents weren't just being unfair, they were projecting their own unresolved insecurities onto us. I couldn't believe I hadn't put it together sooner. I brought this up in therapy, and my therapist encouraged me to use this insight not to excuse their behavior but to understand where it was coming from. That made it easier to focus on healing for myself rather than trying to fix them. While I was piecing that together, Emily dropped a bombshell on the family. She was engaged. She announced it in our family group chat with a picture of the ring and a message that said she couldn't wait to celebrate with everyone. The chat exploded with congratulations, heart emojis, and plans for a big engagement party. Despite everything, I decided to attend. It wasn't about the family, it was about supporting Emily. She and I had built a new kind of bond, and I wanted to be there for her. The engagement party was held at a nice venue, and the whole family showed up dressed to the nines. From the moment I walked in, the energy was complicated. Some relatives greeted me warmly, while others gave me side-eye, probably still salty about the dinner confrontation. My parents were oddly cheerful toward me, which threw me off. They acted as if nothing had happened, asking about my work and even complimenting my outfit. It was strange, but I played along for the sake of keeping the peace. Toward the middle of the party, something unexpected happened. One of my uncles pulled me aside. He wasn't someone I interacted with much, but he surprised me by saying he admired how I'd stood up for myself at the last dinner. He shared that he'd experienced similar comparisons growing up and wished he'd had the courage to speak out. Hearing that felt like validation I didn't even know I needed. Maybe the cracks in the family dynamics were starting to spread wider than I thought. Emily was the star of the night, of course, but she made a point to include me. At one point, she introduced me to her fiancé's family, calling me her favorite cousin. It felt genuine, not like something she was saying for show. Later, she pulled me aside and thanked me again for standing by her. She even joked that I was the reason she had the confidence to speak up in the first place. It was a small moment, but it meant a lot. Outside of family drama, things in my life were starting to come together. Work was steady, and I was exploring a side hustle in photography. I got a couple of paid gigs and started building a portfolio. Sharing these wins on social media brought an outpouring of support, especially from people who'd followed my story on Reddit. My last post had gone viral, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of family pressure and comparisons. It was humbling and inspiring to know I wasn't alone. Back in therapy, I shifted my focus to forgiveness, not for my parents' sake, but for my own peace of mind. Letting go of the anger didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It just meant I wasn't going to let it control me anymore. Around the same time, my younger sister and I made a pact to have each other's backs at future family events. She'd been one of my biggest supporters recently, and it felt good to know I wasn't completely alone in this. Of course, my parents couldn't stay out of the drama for long. A few days after the engagement party, my dad called me and accused me of turning the family against them. He said my actions had caused a rift and that they felt like I was painting them as villains. I calmly reminded him that I'd only shared my truth and that any fallout was the result of their own actions, not mine. He wasn't happy with that answer, but I didn't let it escalate. Meanwhile, I was hitting a major milestone in my personal life. I bought my first home. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. Signing those papers felt like a symbol of independence, proof that I was building a life on my own terms, away from the family's expectations. I didn't tell anyone except my sister and Emily, who were both thrilled for me. To wrap this up, I'll leave you with a bit of a teaser. Let's just say there's a big change on the horizon, one that I think will shake up the family dynamics even more. I can't share details just yet, but stay tuned. Things are about to get interesting. Update 4. After months of back and forth tension with my family, I decided to accept an invitation to the annual family reunion. It wasn't an easy decision, but the constant nagging from my parents finally wore me down. Plus, I was curious to see how things would play out after everything that had happened. Would they acknowledge my boundaries? Would Emily and I still be on the same page? There was only one way to find out. The reunion was held at a community center, decked out with picnic tables, string lights, and a buffet that could feed an army. From the moment I arrived, I could feel the weight of 100 expectations. My parents were the first to greet me, their smiles just a little too wide. They asked about my new house, complimented my outfit, and even introduced me to a distant relative I barely remembered. On the surface, it looked like they were making an effort, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Things were fine at first. I stuck close to Emily, who had become my unofficial ally at these events. We chatted about her wedding plans, which seemed to be the main topic of conversation. Every so often, someone would bring up her latest accomplishment or gush about her fiancé, but Emily was quick to redirect the conversation, often turning the spotlight on me. It was subtle but effective. For once, I didn't feel like I was standing in her shadow, but of course it didn't last. At one point, my dad made an offhand comment about how I should take notes from Emily's career path. It was said in a lighthearted tone, but the meaning was clear. My mom chimed in, reminiscing about how Emily had always been so focused and driven since childhood, I could feel the familiar frustration building, but before I could respond, Emily stepped in. She smiled and casually mentioned my recent photography feature in a local magazine, calling it amazing and so creative. The shift was immediate. Suddenly, everyone at the table was asking me about my work, the feature, and whether I had more projects in the pipeline. Emily had effectively derailed the comparison train, and for the first time, I felt like my accomplishments were being seen. Later, I overheard a group of older relatives gossiping about me. They were speculating about why I didn't follow a more traditional career path and making veiled comments about my choices. Before I could decide whether to walk away or confront them, one of my younger cousins spoke up. She defended me, pointing out that I was clearly doing well and that it was outdated to judge someone for not fitting into a specific mold. Her words caught me off guard, but I felt a surge of gratitude. Maybe things were changing, one small step at a time. The highlight of the reunion came during dinner. My younger sister, who had been one of my biggest supporters lately, stood up and made an impromptu toast. She started by talking about the importance of family and then pivoted to my journey. She praised my resilience, creativity, and the way I was carving out a path for myself despite all the challenges. Her words brought a few relatives to tears, and for once, the spotlight wasn't on Emily, it was on me. I caught Emily's eye across the table, and she gave me a thumbs up. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. After dinner, my parents pulled me aside for a private conversation. My dad insisted they hadn't meant to offend me with their earlier comments and accused me of being too sensitive. My mom doubled down, saying they were just trying to motivate me. I pushed back, calmly but firmly, explaining how their words over the years had affected me and how I needed them to respect my boundaries. The conversation grew heated, with my dad accusing me of holding a grudge and refusing to let things go. When I brought this up in therapy later, my therapist reminded me of something we'd discussed before, focusing on repair instead of revenge. The goal wasn't to win the argument, but to create space for healthier dynamics. It wasn't easy, but I ended the conversation by reiterating my boundaries and walking away before things escalated further. Back on Reddit, I shared my experience, and one comment stood out. Someone suggested family therapy as a way to address the deeper issues. It wasn't a new idea, I'd thought about it before, but hearing it from someone else gave me the push I needed to bring it up with my parents. Predictably, they dismissed the idea, calling it unnecessary and a waste of money. I didn't press the issue, but I filed it away as something worth revisiting in the future. Emily, on the other hand, was all in. She offered to mediate a family conversation, saying she wanted to help bridge the gap. It was a generous offer, but I wasn't sure how effective it would be, especially with my parents' resistance. In the meantime, they began reaching out to other relatives, painting me as the one who couldn't move on. I heard about this through the grapevine but chose not to engage. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into the old patterns. Toward the end of the reunion, something surprising happened. My parents made an effort to engage with me in a positive way. My dad asked more thoughtful questions about my photography, and my mom expressed interest in one of my upcoming projects. It wasn't a complete turnaround, but it felt like a small step forward. Maybe they were starting to realize that change was possible, even if it was slow. For now, I'm holding on to that hopeful sign. The road ahead isn't easy, but I'm learning to stand firm in my boundaries while staying open to progress. One thing's for sure, this chapter is far from over. Update 5. After everything that's happened, I didn't expect things to take the turn they did. It feels like I'm finally stepping into a new chapter, one that doesn't revolve around old comparisons or family drama. But let me start from the beginning. A few weeks ago, I received an email that completely floored me. I'd won a prestigious award in my industry for a photography project I'd worked on for months. It was one of those moments where you have to reread the email 3 times to make sure it's real. For the first time, I felt like all the hard work I'd put into building my career and identity was paying off. Instead of rushing to tell my family, I kept the news to myself. I shared it with close friends and a few colleagues, who were all thrilled for me. I guess part of me didn't want to deal with the mixed reactions I'd learned to expect from my parents and extended family. I wasn't hiding it, I just wanted to enjoy the moment on my own terms. That didn't last long. A distant relative who'd seen the announcement online told my parents. A day later, I got a call from my mom, who was unusually excited. She congratulated me, going on about how proud they were. It was rare to hear such unfiltered enthusiasm from her, and for a moment it felt like a breakthrough. My dad even got on the phone to ask about the project, which caught me off guard. It seemed like for once they were celebrating my achievements without comparing me to anyone else. Meanwhile, Emily's wedding planning was in full swing. She called me one evening and asked if I could help her with some of the details, specifically the photography and creative aspects. It was clear she valued my input, and it felt good to be included in such a meaningful way. As we worked on the plans, I noticed how much closer we'd become. Emily went out of her way to make sure I felt appreciated, and I could tell she was making an effort to bridge the gap that had once been between us. At family gatherings, people started noticing too. There were whispers about how close Emily and I had gotten, with some relatives joking about our new alliance. I didn't care about the comments. If anything, they made me realize how far we'd come as cousins. In the midst of all this, my younger sister dropped a surprising revelation. Over coffee one weekend, she admitted that she'd been working behind the scenes to help our parents understand my perspective. She'd been sharing articles about toxic family dynamics and gently pointing out examples of their behavior. It wasn't something I'd asked her to do, but knowing she had my back meant the world. Therapy was also starting to feel like a real game changer. My therapist pointed out how much progress I'd made in letting go of old grudges and focusing on my own growth. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving family dynamics. I was thriving despite them. Around this time, I decided to write a letter to my parents. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to lay everything out, my experiences growing up, how the comparisons had affected me, and what I needed from them moving forward. I made sure the tone was honest but not accusatory. After all, this wasn't about blame, it was about healing. Their response surprised me. My dad called first, sounding a little defensive at first, but eventually acknowledged that they might not have realized how their actions affected me. My mom followed up with a long text, apologizing for some things but still insisting they meant well. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. Then came Emily's wedding day. It was a beautiful ceremony held at a vineyard with rolling hills and perfect weather. Watching her walk down the aisle, I felt genuinely happy for her, which was something I wasn't sure I'd ever feel. During the reception, Emily gave a speech that caught everyone off guard. She thanked her family for their support, but then shifted focus to me. She talked about how much she admired my strength and growth and how I'd inspired her to stand up for herself too. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. After the wedding, my parents pulled me aside for a private conversation. They admitted they'd been reflecting on their actions and wanted to do better. To my shock, they even agreed to try a few family therapy sessions. It wasn't something I'd expected, but it felt like a huge step forward. Since then, family gatherings have started to feel different. The comparisons that once dominated every conversation have faded, replaced by genuine interest in each other's lives. Emily and I continue to support each other, and my sister remains my biggest ally. Slowly but surely, the family dynamics are shifting. I shared this journey with Reddit, and the response has been overwhelming. My posts have resonated with so many people who faced similar struggles, and I'm grateful for the advice and encouragement I've received along the way. As for me, I'm finally in a place where I can look back and see how far I've come, not just in my relationships, but in finding my own identity and happiness. This isn't the end of the story, but it feels like the beginning of something new. Thank you all for being part of the journey.